welcome to Week in Review with me, Gillian Joseph. Sonia Sodha from The Observer and journalist Roy Anika are here to look back at the biggest stories of the past 7 days. So, ladies, starting with you first, Roy, what was your biggest story of the week?
Mine's Theresa May flexing her muscles with the men of Europe and Donald Tusk telling them that Gibraltar is off the table with Brexit.
Sonia?
And for me, I think it has to be Syria. We saw the really distressing images from the chemical attack this week, and now President Trump has launched airstrikes against President Assad, which is probably the most significant intervention we've seen in the 8-year conflict.
Well, that's our top story this week, the horrific chemical weapons attack on the Syrian city of Idlib and the reaction it provoked. The bombing was widely blamed on President Assad's regime, an accusation it denied, supported by Russia. President Trump launched missile strikes on a Syrian airfield in retaliation to the attack, which he described as an affront to humanity. Here's our US correspondent, Cordelia Lynch.
President Trump has done in 48 hours what Barack Obama refused to do in 6 years. Launching dozens of cruise missiles on a Syrian airbase where the US believe Assad fired chemical weapons. Trump was swift to address the nation.
Tonight I ordered a targeted military strike on the airfield in Syria from where the chemical attack was launched.
This was what changed the mind of the president, a suspected nerve gas attack which left more than 80 people dead in the Syrian town of Khan Sheikhoun. Less than 3 months into his presidency, Trump has retaliated against a foreign government after long promising he wouldn't entangle America in more Middle Eastern wars. It appears to be a warning to the world. Aircraft and infrastructure have been damaged. Syrian state TV say it was an act of aggression. But the true impact is unclear, and there is one pressing question with no easy answer. What next?
Well, clearly President Trump changing his mind and changing tact, saying that, he was moved by the images that he saw out of Syria. But that question remains unanswered. What next?
Well, I think that's a really good question, and I think that's what the international community is going to be struggling with. I think the reason why airstrikes were right was that Assad again crossed a red line. He broke international law against the use of chemical weapons. That law is there for a reason, and it's not been upheld in the past. In 2013, we saw something similar happen, and the international community didn't take the action that was required. But all this can do is a gesture. It sends a signal, and we have to hope that Assad takes it into account. But it's not going to end the war in Syria. No one's claiming that. There aren't any easy solutions in Syria. It's incredibly messy and complex. You've got Assad, the terrible atrocities he's committing, but you've also got Islamic State. So there are no good, I think it was the right thing to do, but there are no good solutions.
But have we turned a corner, though, because President Trump is now calling for an international response?
He is. I don't think he's going to get one. I agree that I think the strikes were the right thing to do. I think probably the international community are slightly nervous about a trigger-happy Donald Trump. It's the one thing we wanted to see avoided. I mean, this feels very much to me as much about Donald Trump sending a signal to Syria as he is sending a signal to Russia. And, we've had a lot of sort of discussion about his relationship with Putin, whether they're going to get on, whether they're not. Recently, that's changed. And, Russia's stance on Syria is crucial here. They continue to back the Assad regime. I think these airstrikes, Russia's defense of the chemical attack by attempting to say that it was, missiles launched on the ground factory were just ludicrous. But I think Trump is sending a very clear signal here to Russia about, how he's going to respond internationally if they try anything as well.
Well, that's our top story in a busy news week. So here's 5 things you might have missed. Members of the royal family joined victims, their families and members of the emergency services at a ceremony to mark the Westminster terror attack. The event was described as a service of hope to pay tribute to those who lost their lives. Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall visited the Pope in Vatican City. The meeting was part of a 9-day European tour, which included a trip to an Italian town hit by an earthquake last summer. 14 people were killed in a bombing on the metro in the Russian city of St. Petersburg. The attack happened on a train running between 2 stations in the center of the city on Monday afternoon. The bombing has been blamed on a man from Kyrgyzstan who it's claimed had radical Islamist links. 2,000 people have been evacuated from their homes in New Zealand after a concrete embankment collapsed. Cyclone Debbie dumped heavy rain over the North Island, swelling creeks and rivers and forcing water into hundreds of properties. And one of the biggest political talking points of the week, what should the Labour Party do with Ken Livingstone? The party suspended him for over a year over comments he made about Hitler and Zionism. But some party supporters said he should have been expelled. Here's what the former Mayor of London had to say after the hearing.
I felt the whole thing was like, sitting through a court in North Korea. I mean, no one was listening to anything we were actually saying. I've been suspended for stating the truth. Labour MPs who tweeted that I was anti-Semitic, I'd said Hitler was a Zionist, I said, Nazi apology, all that. No disciplinary action against them.
So what do you make of how the party has dealt with Ken Livingstone? No expulsion.
Well, it's been a complete mess, and the fact that you have this sort of party committee saying that they're not going to expel him, it's just a suspension from holding office in the Labour Party for a year. They're not even kicking him out temporarily for a year. You have that happen, and then you have lots of Labour MPs come out straight away and say this just isn't good enough. His comments were incredibly and deeply offensive, and lots of people thought they were anti-Semitic, and he needs to suffer the consequences of that. So it leaves the Labour Party in a complete mess. Jeremy Corbyn actually came out and issued quite a strong statement against Ken Livingstone. I mean, it took longer than it should have done, but he's now said that he's going to launch another investigation using a different body of the party to look at. Exactly. And it's just, it's just a terrible look for the Labour Party. I mean, all this stuff is going on in the world. You've got Syria, you've got things going on in North Korea, and yes, they did get a positive story out there, which we'll talk about later. But most of the week was spent talking about an internal disciplinary matter of, a guy who used to be mayor who has made, a series of bizarre and incredibly offensive comments about Hitler and the Jews. It's just a completely bizarre state of affairs for, what's supposed to be Britain's main opposition party.
And comments that he's still, to this point, defending. I mean, Roy, do you think he should be expelled?
Yeah, I do. And I think, it shows another sort of element of Jeremy Corbyn's weakness, that he's not prepared to just, pull the trigger and let him go. The other thing, it takes you back to the very sort of root of this, that Labour's saying it would pledge to get rid of anti-Semitism in the party, but you had that what was seen as a whitewash report by Shami Chakrabarti, who was then made Labour peer, exonerating the Labour Party from being anti-Semitic, which its own members had said that it was. And now you have this. The party needs to, and I know they're worried about Ken Livingstone potentially taking the party to judicial review. But at the end of the day, it's caused so much turmoil in the party. It's been so embarrassing for them. They should just take a stance and let him go. It's not acceptable for him to say things like that.
OK, let's move on. And this week, just a few days on from triggering Article 50, the UK's relationship with the EU and its members became even more frosty. Tensions with Spain escalated over Gibraltar. And then former UKIP leader Nigel Farage compared members of the European Parliament to the mafia. Sky's Europe correspondent Mark Stone reports from Strasbourg.
For a chamber so long dismissed by so many in the UK, it's an irony that it's they who hold the key to Brexit. In 2 years, the 751 MEPs here will vote on the divorce deal. Among them for the debate on their red lines, Michel Barnier, the EU's chief negotiator. Conciliatory, perhaps, in making a point of introducing himself to the man whose career mission has been to reach this Brexit moment. Nigel Farage must have smiled when he saw the screen, a debate he's always wanted, but he began with a swipe.
All I can say is thank goodness we're leaving. You're behaving like the mafia. You think we're a hostage. We're not. We're free to go. We're free to go.
Mr. Barnier focused more on the substance of the divorce to come and that exit bill. And from the Parliament's Brexit coordinator, a prediction.
There will be a young man or a young woman who will try again, who will lead Britain again into the European family once again. And a young generation that will see Brexit for what it really is.
In the Parliament canteen, as the vote concluded, a young choir with their version of the EU anthem. It is Beethoven's Ode to Joy, but all sides in this divorce know that reaching a Brexit deal will be anything but.
Yeah, nice line, ode to joy, not. Nigel Farage, his performance, I mean, that does nothing to help Brexit negotiations, does it?
No, but I suspect people aren't really going to be taking him seriously in the European Parliament. Thank goodness he's not going to be leading our negotiations for us. I mean, he was just using it as an opportunity for bluster, to have a pop. I think there's going to be lots of his colleagues in the European Parliament who aren't going to be particularly surprised. It's not a great look, but hey-ho, it's Nigel Farage. Are we really surprised and shocked? I'm certainly not.
It's the only thing he's got, really, to cling on to, and I think, you know, it's almost like he can't quite accept that he isn't going to be involved in the Brexit negotiations. He's going to be nowhere near them. So by you know, describing the European Parliament as mafia, you know, behaving like mafia, it's his only way of still having a sort of public platform. He's achieved what he wanted out to achieve. You know, congratulations to him. That's what he wanted. But it's hard to see sort of where he's going to fit in as the process, you know, unfolds. He's not going to be involved at a political level, thank goodness.
No, he's not part of it at all. But something that is now part of it, perhaps something that wasn't foreseen, is Gibraltar. A huge mistake not to include it in the actual initial letter to trigger Article 50.
Well, I think there's an argument that it should have been in that letter, but I do think this row has got completely overblown, obviously not helped by Michael Howard earlier this week, going on television and saying, you know, that this might be something that Britain goes to war with Spain over, implying that at least. So that wasn't helpful. But I think when you actually take a step back and look at what happened here, what happened was that, you know, the European Union sort of set out its position. It's very much not the case that Spain has got a particular veto over the arrangement with Gibraltar, as the sort of, I think, that the press has sort of somehow made out. You know, the fact of the matter is that Spain, like every other EU country, has a veto over Britain's Brexit deal. That's just the way the European Union works.
I thought Michael Howard's comments at the beginning of the week were completely ridiculous, and actually the way that Theresa May has handled it, I think has been quite good. It might have been an omission for her not putting, you know, that in the original letter that went to the European Parliament, particularly as Gibraltar had asked her to do it. But I think her meeting with Donald Tusk this week, you know, she put down a very clear marker line saying Gibraltar is off the table. I think one of the interesting things that potentially both sides could be thinking about is the issue of co-sovereignty, which was looked at in around 2002. Peter Hain has talked about it again this week. He finally struck a deal with Spain, which had everything that Britain wanted, and Spain conceded on everything, and they agreed it. It was vetoed at the last minute by the then Prime Minister, Aznar. But it could be looked at again here, and I think Theresa May would be wise to revisit it. But I don't think there's any issue over the fact that, you know, people in Gibraltar don't want their sovereignty to change, and it needs to come from them, and it won't. I think it was blown out of proportion at the beginning of the week, but I think Theresa May has been very good and very firm with Donald Tusk, saying this is not going to be part of it, it's off the table, and I think she'll get her way on that.
Still to come on A Week in Review, we'll take a look at some of the other stories that have hit the headlines. Plus, has it been a good week or a bad week for Prince Harry? Find out next. Welcome back to Week in Review with me, Gillian Joseph. I'm joined by Sonia Sodha, Chief Leader Writer at The Observer, and journalist Roya Nika. Well, this week, the Supreme Court decided that a father who took his daughter on holiday during the school term acted unlawfully. The judgment ended a long legal battle fought by John Platt, who was originally fined £120 for taking his daughter to Florida for 2 weeks without her school's permission. Sky's David Bowden reports.
Kids, the beach, donkeys and ice creams. Even Blackpool Tower for good measure. The perfect ingredients for many for the school holidays. But thousands of parents want to take their children out of school during term time. And for them, the Supreme Court has now ruled that unequivocally it's against the law.
If one pupil can be taken out whenever it suits the parent, then so can others. Different pupils might be taken out at different times, multiplying the disruptive effect.
But now I have got this situation where potentially being a minute late to school could be a criminal offence, and that really offends me.
John Platt is the father who took his daughter on holiday during term time and refused to pay the £120 fine for doing so, which ended up with the Supreme Court ruling.
I'm a spokesman for one person only, myself, but I know this affects every other parent in England. You forget term time holidays. It is a criminal offence for a child to be late to school. If the school rule says they must be here at all times and on all days, and the very great majority of schools that's their position, then that's what you must do.
John Platt's days in court aren't over. He's still asked to appear before magistrates on the Isle of Wight over the original unpaid fine.
And what did you make of that story? I mean, he's obviously lost the case. Was it a fight worth having, though?
It obviously was to him, although, I mean, you know, it was originally over a £60 fine. It's cost him £12,000 in legal fees. One would question that. But it's clearly not about the money for him. It's about the principle. I agree with the Supreme Court's judgment that I think, you know, parents do have to get permission first. That was the issue. And you know, as that head teacher said, there are 13 weeks in that school year where he could take them out. Of course, there's the issue over, you know, holidays being more expensive. What I don't agree with is the Supreme Court's recommendation that when this goes back to the magistrates that he's actually convicted. I think that would be wrong. I don't think he should have a criminal record for having taken his daughter to Florida. You know, I agree he should pay a fine, but I think that would set a dangerous precedent going forwards, and I don't think it should be. I don't think it should be. He should not bear a conviction for that.
But he's actually saying that he's not going to pay the fine. He's no intention of paying the fine, so he could end up being imprisoned.
I suspect he'll concede when it comes to it.
Yeah, I think the same thing. I'm actually a governor of a primary school, and so I know how disruptive it is if children are taken out during term time. And, you know, as the Supreme Court judge said in that package just there, you know, if you've got children being taken out throughout the year at different times, it makes it really difficult for a classroom teacher to catch children up, to make sure children who are away, you know, aren't missing out on things, and it affects the education of children who aren't taken out to go on holidays as well.
OK, let's move on to your choices of the top stories in the papers this week, starting with you first, Roya.
Well, Theresa May went off to Saudi Arabia and also to Jordan. You know, there's always criticism when prime ministers or government ministers or members of the royal family go to Saudi Arabia because of its awful record on human rights and other things. Theresa May made the case that she needs to go to Saudi Arabia, obviously to boost trade links and trade talks. The other point she made, which I don't really buy into, is that by her being involved with a Saudi Arabia regime and by holding discussions with them, she's more able, or her government will be more able to be influential on changing things like their human rights record and women's rights out in Saudi Arabia, which is still absolutely appalling. But historically, there's never really been any proof of that. You know, our governments and prime ministers who have always, you know, tried to abuse.
Isn't there a logic, though, that you can't change things from the outside? And if you do have a closer relationship, you can raise things in a more diplomatic way.
We're never going to be on the outside with Saudi Arabia. We've always had a very close relationship with them, and you know, they enjoy the benefits of that too. But I don't think that by her, you know, I think that's a bit of a bogus argument.
Let's move on to free school meals, Sonia, and how they're funded. This is a Jeremy Corbyn policy.
Yeah, so it's for the first time in a very long time, we saw the Labour Party put out a new, quite catchy, easy to understand policy. They said they're going to put VAT on private school fees and use the money that they generate from that, if they were in government, which is obviously quite a long way off, but put the money that they would generate from that £1.5 billion into paying for free school meals for all children in primary schools across England. Now, I think the VAT on private school fees is absolutely fair enough, and I think that's a good idea. I would be spending it on different things.
Roya, diesel cars.
Diesel cars.
I'm a little bit bitter on this because I've got two in my household.
I feel very sorry for you because you would have bought those cars with the best of intentions. So potentially drivers, not just in London actually, but in 7 other cities around the country are going to be facing £20 fines, not fines, but levies on, charges on driving into cities. I mean, Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, is very keen this happens. You know, that he's talked about the poor air quality in London is appalling, and it's costing the NHS billions of pounds in early deaths from elderly people. It's really bad for children too. So I think the idea is right, but I do feel incredibly sorry for diesel car owners because they bought those cars with the best of intentions, and it turns out that so much information from several car manufacturers has been completely bogus and actually sort of deceitful, and people didn't really know what they were getting when they were buying these cars.
Perhaps there will be some help for them. And there might be a solution to that, driverless cars.
Yeah, so one very interesting story that's broken this week is there is a new driverless shuttle being tested in and around Greenwich. Now, it's quite a tentative step into driverless technology. It's quite a small shuttle. It's, you know, running in a pedestrianised zone and a zone for cyclists. so not actually out on the road yet. But I think it is really a sign of the future and potentially of things to come. We know lots of big companies, Google, Uber, really interested in driverless technology. But it does raise some quite difficult questions, I think. Number one, what happens to all the jobs that gets replaced? So there's a whole cadre of jobs in the economy, couriers, taxi drivers, hauliers. What's going to happen to those jobs and what are those people going to do? And secondly, it raises really interesting questions about safety and ethics. So if a driverless car is driving along, what sort of algorithm, and it has to sort of make a choice whether to swerve and hit a young person or an older person, what sort of algorithm, I know that's an awful situation,
That's an awful
but what sort of algorithm is going to determine those choices that we might instinctively make in the moment?
Well, thanks for taking us through the newspapers. Let's have a look at the ups and downs of the week. Let's start with you first, Roy.
Mine is Prince Harry. I'm sending the Ginger Ninja up because I really admire what he did this week with the campaign for landmines. He gave a very emotional, very impassioned speech at Kensington Palace on Tuesday, where he talked very movingly about the work that his mother, Princess Diana, had done with charities like the Halo Trust and her very famous walk through the Angola minefields. She campaigned for an international ban on landmines. Her work was absolutely incredibly important in getting the Ottawa Treaty signed, but not all countries around the world, including the United States, have signed up to this international landmine ban. He gave a very moving speech talking about how it's important that he and future generations finish the work that his mother started. And there's no doubt that Harry's involvement behind the scenes with all these other very good organisations who've been working on it for a long time helped to secure, crucially, an extra £100 million from DFID towards this campaign to ban international landmines. I think that's a very, very important thing that he's done.
That's a huge amount. So sending Prince Harry up there. And who are you sending, or what are you sending down?
Sending down Shia LaBeouf and his probably his reputation. I mean, he was such a massive Hollywood star about 5 or 6 years ago. He was the sort of the golden boy of the Transformer films franchise. But his new film, which is called Man Down, a war veteran thriller, has made, in its first weekend, I think it made around £7. I think there was apparently only one ticket sold.
£7.
I think it's now gone up to the heady heights of £20.
It was only released in one cinema, though, wasn't it?
I know, but you might have hoped for at least to hit the 100 marker.
Yeah.
Slightly embarrassing for Shia LaBeouf. He may be reconsidering his career options, but he's got millions of bank. Who cares? But a bit of a flop, to put it mildly.
Well, it has increased from one ticket sale to possibly two and a half. So, Sonia, what are you sending up?
Well, I think it's been a good week for staying active and more to the point, gym. So the British Heart Foundation published some new figures this week that suggested an awful lot of us, I think it was almost 20 million, are not meeting sort of, the government's activity targets, which is for 150 minutes of moderate activity a week and 2 days of strength work or some sort of strength training. So that's actually, quite a high bar, I think. So, and when you look at the figures, it's an awful lot of people who aren't doing that amount of exercise, in which the British Heart Foundation say, are putting themselves at risk.
Do you make it to the gym more than a couple of times?
I actually go about 4 times a week,
well
Gillian.
Done.
Yeah.
Well done, you. What are you going to send down for us?
So I think it's got to be Pepsi this week, who put out that absolutely ridiculous advert starring Kendall Jenner. I mean, I don't know if you watched it, but it was just, it was just
ludicrous.
It was ludicrous to watch, exactly. And
the thing is, it would have taken several people to come up with that idea, and somebody wrote it off and said, yes, this is good.
Yeah, although it's interesting, isn't it? I do think, because there is an extent to which there is no such thing as bad publicity, and to some extent, Pepsi has been absolutely ridiculed, quite rightly, on social media and the press this week for that advert, which, basically made light of the Black Lives Matters protests, made it seem like Kendall Jenner with a can of Pepsi was going to save the world. It was just ridiculous. But at the same time, their name has been everywhere, and maybe that's what they were planning.
Well, they were saying that they were hoping to promote the spirit of harmony, and they've probably made a few dollars out of it as well. Thank you very much, both. Thanks for joining us, Roya and Sonia, for Week in Review. And don't forget, if you want to join in the debate and discussion, use the hashtag WinOurWeekInReview. Thank you very much for watching.